Have you ever wondered why the very people who gave us the Bible, the ones who eagerly awaited the Messiah for centuries, reject Jesus as that promised Savior? It's a question that has puzzled Christians for 2 millennia. Today, we're going to unravel this mystery. Imagine this: a people chosen by God, given prophecies and promises, waiting for their deliverer. And then, when he arrives, they don't recognize him. It sounds like a plot twist in a divine drama, doesn't it? But this isn't fiction. It's the reality that has shaped religious history and continues to impact our world today. You might think it's simple: they just didn't believe. But it's more complex and fascinating than you might imagine. We're about to embark on a journey through history, theology, and culture that will challenge your assumptions and deepen your understanding. From the dusty streets of ancient Jerusalem to the vibrant Jewish communities of today, we'll explore the real reasons behind this rejection. What we're about to uncover might just change the way you view not only Jewish-Christian relations and your own faith. So buckle up, open your minds, and prepare your hearts. We're about to dive deep into one of the most intriguing religious mysteries of all time. By the end of this video, you'll have insights that few Christians have ever considered. You'll also be equipped with understanding that can bridge gaps and foster dialogue. Are you ready to have your perspective transformed? Let's begin this eye-opening exploration. Let's start with an exploration of why the Jewish people reject Jesus as the Messiah. Trust me, the reasons will surprise you, challenge you, and ultimately enrich your faith in ways you never expected. To truly understand why the Jewish people reject Jesus as the Messiah, we need to journey back in time to the bustling streets of ancient Israel. Picture yourself there, in the middle of the market, surrounded by the noise of the crowds, the smell of spices, and the passionate discussions about the promised Messiah. It's a world far removed from our own, yet it holds the key to our question. In those days, the air was thick with anticipation. The Jewish people had endured centuries of oppression from the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and now the Romans. They all tried to conquer the Jews. But the Jews clung to the promises found in their sacred scriptures. They believed that a deliverer would restore their nation to its former glory. But what exactly were they expecting? This is where things get interesting. The messianic expectations of ancient Israel were far more complex than many of us realize today. They weren't looking for a spiritual savior in the way we understand Jesus. They expected a very different kind of Messiah. Picture a warrior king, a descendant of David riding in on a warhorse, sword in hand. This Messiah was expected to overthrow the oppressors. The expectations of the ancient Israelites were more complex and nuanced than many of us realize today. They weren't looking for a spiritual savior in the way we understand Jesus. No, their hopes were set on a very different kind of Messiah. Imagine a warrior king, a descendant of David, riding in on a warhorse, sword in hand. This Messiah was expected to overthrow the oppressors, and the Messiah was supposed to set up the Davidic dynasty and bring peace and prosperity to Israel. The prophet Isaiah said, "A child has been born to us, a son has been given, and the government will be on his shoulders." Isaiah 9:6. But it wasn't just about political liberation. The Messianic age was also supposed to bring about a spiritual revival. The prophet Jeremiah spoke of a time when God would make a new covenant with his people, writing his law on their hearts. Jeremiah 31 verse 31 to 33. The people expected a restoration of temple worship and a return of the exiles from all corners of the earth. Now, here's where it gets really fascinating. These expectations weren't just wishful thinking. They were deeply rooted in centuries of prophecy and tradition. The Jewish people had carefully studied and interpreted their scriptures, developing a rich tapestry of messianic thought. For instance, they looked to passages like Daniel 7 verse 13-14, which speaks of one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven and being given authority over all peoples. They were pondering Zechariah 9 verse 9-10, which describes a king coming to Jerusalem, righteous, and having salvation, riding on a donkey. But here's the kicker: this is crucial to understanding the Jewish rejection of Jesus. These prophecies were often interpreted in light of their current circumstances, under Roman oppression. The idea of a conquering Messiah who would restore Israel's political autonomy was particularly appealing. So when Jesus appeared on the scene, he was preaching a message of spiritual redemption, not political revolution. It's easy to see why many were skeptical. His approach didn't align with the prevailing messianic expectations of the time. This historical context is important because it shows us that the Jewish rejection of Jesus wasn't born out of stubbornness or blindness. It was rooted in centuries of carefully developed theological understanding and fervent hope for national restoration. Let's dive into the heart of the matter, the theological chasm. This is what separates Jewish and Christian interpretations of messianic prophecies. It's not just a matter of differing opinions. It's a fundamental divergence in how we read and understand the same sacred texts. Imagine you're holding an ancient scroll. Its parchment is weathered by time. The words inscribed on it are the same whether you're a Jew or a Christian. But the meaning you derive from them could be worlds apart. This is the crux of our theological divide. Take, for instance, the famous prophecy in Isaiah 7 verse 14. The Lord will give you a sign, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, who will be called Emmanuel. For Christians, this is a clear reference to the miraculous birth of Jesus. However, from a Jewish perspective, the verse has a different context and meaning. In the original Hebrew, the word translated as virgin is Alma, which has a slightly different connotation. The word used in the original Hebrew text actually means young woman. Jewish scholars believe that this prophecy was fulfilled in Isaiah's time, referring to a contemporary event rather than a future Messiah. They see it as a sign given to King Ahaz about the downfall of his enemies, not a prediction of a virgin birth centuries later. Now, let's look at another crucial prophecy, the suffering servant described in Isaiah 53. Christians see this as a clear foretelling of Jesus' sacrificial death. However, Jewish interpretation sees this passage as a metaphor for the nation of Israel enduring suffering for the sake of the world. These differing interpretations extend to numerous other prophecies. For example, Christians see Micah 5 verse 2 as predicting Jesus' birth in Bethlehem, but Jews understand it to refer to the Messiah's ancestral lineage, not necessarily his birthplace. To the Messiah's ancestral lineage, not necessarily his birthplace. Zechariah 12 verse 10, "They will look on me, the one they have pierced," is read by Christians as a prophecy of the crucifixion, while Jews interpret it in the context of national mourning. Tradition says the Messiah has to meet certain criteria: gathering the Jewish exiles, rebuilding the temple, bringing world peace, and spreading universal knowledge of God. From their perspective, Jesus didn't fulfill these requirements. Plus, the idea of a suffering Messiah who dies for the sins of others is foreign to traditional Jewish thought. In Jewish theology, each person is responsible for their own sins. Repentance and good deeds are the path to forgiveness. The Christian concept of vicarious atonement through Jesus' death is a major stumbling block. Another significant divide lies in the understanding of the Messiah's nature. Christianity's belief in Jesus as both fully God and fully man contradicts the Jewish conception of an indivisible man. The idea of God becoming flesh is seen as incompatible with Jewish monotheism. It's important to understand that these aren't just academic disagreements. They represent deeply held beliefs rooted in centuries of scholarship and tradition. For many Jews, accepting Jesus as the Messiah would mean reinterpreting their entire scriptural and cultural heritage. This theological divide shows us how complex faith and interpretation can be. It challenges us to it's important to approach our own beliefs with humility and recognize that the same words can be understood in profoundly different ways depending on one's background and tradition. When we talk about why Jewish people reject Jesus as the Messiah, we're not just dealing with ancient texts and theological debates. We're stepping into the realm of identity, which is a powerful force that shapes beliefs, behaviors, and entire cultures. To truly understand this rejection, we need to appreciate the deep, strong Jewish identity that has been shaped over millennia by history, tradition, and often adversity. Imagine for a moment that you're part of a people who have maintained their distinct identity for over 4,000 years. Despite being scattered across the globe and despite facing persecution and attempts at forced conversion, you've held on to your beliefs. Customs, traditions, and beliefs are all part of who they are. This is the reality for the Jewish people. Their identity isn't just a label. It's a living, breathing part of who they are. At the core of this identity is the concept of being God's chosen people. As we read in Deuteronomy 7 verse 6, "For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you out of all the peoples." The Jewish people are on the face of the earth to be God's people, His treasured possession. This means they have a sense of responsibility to be a light unto the nations and to uphold God's laws. Now, think about how accepting Jesus as the Messiah might impact this identity. For many Jews, embracing Jesus isn't just about changing religious beliefs. It's seen as a fundamental shift in identity. It's seen as a shift in who they are. It's seen as stepping away from the very community and heritage that has defined them for generations. Moreover, Jewish identity is deeply intertwined with practice and observance. The Torah commands 613 mitzvot or commandments covering everything from dietary laws to Sabbath observance. These practices aren't just religious rituals. They're the fabric of daily life, family traditions, and community bonds. Christianity, with its focus on faith rather than law, represents a significant departure from this way of life. There's also the historical context. For centuries, Jews faced pressure to convert to Christianity. Often, this came with threats of persecution, or even death. This has left deep scars on the collective Jewish psyche. Accepting Jesus can be seen as a betrayal of ancestors who sacrificed everything to maintain their faith and identity. Furthermore, the Holocaust, a tragedy still within living memory for many, has intensified the need to preserve Jewish identity. In the face of near annihilation, many Jews feel a profound responsibility to ensure the continuation of their people. Embracing a faith that has historically been associated with their persecutors can feel like a betrayal of this responsibility. It's also worth noting that Jewish identity isn't solely religious. For many, being Jewish is as much about culture, ethnicity, and shared history as it is about belief. Even secular Jews who may not practice religion often feel a strong connection to their Jewish heritage. Accepting Jesus can be seen as severing these cultural and familial ties. In Jewish communities, there's often a saying, "To be a Jew means to if we say we and not I." This collective identity is powerful. It provides a sense of belonging, a framework for understanding the world, and a connection to something greater than oneself. Stepping away from this collective identity to embrace a faith that emphasizes personal salvation can be challenging. Additionally, the concept of messianic redemption in Jewish thought is tied to national restoration and universal peace. The personal salvation offered by Christianity can seem at odds with this communal vision of redemption. Understanding these cultural and social factors help us see that the Jewish rejection of Jesus isn't just about theological disagreements. It's about preserving an identity that has survived against incredible odds. It's an identity that provides meaning, community, and a sense of purpose. To truly understand why many Jewish people reject Jesus as the Messiah, we have to confront a dark and painful chapter in history, the long legacy of persecution that the Jewish people have endured, often at the hands of those who claim to follow Christ. This history isn't just a series of isolated incidents, it's a trauma that has been woven into the very fabric of Jewish identity and collective memory. It's not just a few isolated incidents. It's a trauma that has been woven into the fabric of Jewish identity and collective memory. Let's take a journey through time, starting in the early days of Christianity. Initially, the followers of Jesus were seen as a Jewish sect. But as Christianity spread and became the dominant religion in the Roman Empire, tensions began to rise. By the 4th century, with Christianity as the official religion of Rome, Jews found themselves increasingly marginalized and persecuted. Picture yourself in medieval Europe. The Crusades were launched. The Crusades were a series of religious wars that resulted in the massacre of Jewish communities. The First Crusade in 1096 saw the destruction of Jewish communities in the Rhineland. Crusaders on their way to Jerusalem turned their swords on local Jewish populations, giving them the choice of conversion or death. In 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council decreed that Jews should wear distinctive clothing to set them apart. This marking of Jews became a common practice across Europe, stigmatizing them and making them targets for violence. The Spanish Inquisition began in 1478. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were expelled or forced to convert. These weren't isolated incidents. Throughout Europe, Jews faced blood libels, false accusations of using Christian blood in religious rituals. These libels often led to mob violence and massacres. In 1349, as the Black Death swept through Europe, Jews were scapegoated and accused of poisoning wells, leading to widespread persecution and the destruction of hundreds of Jewish communities. The Reformation, while challenging many aspects of the Catholic Church, didn't end anti-Semitism. Martin Luther. He initially hoped to convert Jews. Later, though, he wrote some pretty anti-Semitic tracts refused to accept his teachings. His words were later used to justify persecution in Protestant lands. This pattern of persecution continued into the modern era in Tsarist Russia, where Jews faced restrictive laws and violent pogroms. Then came the Holocaust, the most systematic attempt to eradicate the Jewish people in history. 6 million Jews were murdered by the Nazi regime and its collaborators, many of whom claimed Christian backgrounds. You might think, that was then, and things are different now. And yes, there have been significant improvements in Jewish-Christian relations have improved a lot since the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. Many Christian denominations have officially rejected anti-Semitism and sought reconciliation. However, the scars of history run deep. For many Jews, Christianity is inextricably linked with centuries of persecution. The cross is a symbol of salvation for Christians, but has often been a symbol of terror for Jews. This historical trauma creates a significant barrier to accepting Jesus as the Messiah. Moreover, this history of persecution has reinforced the importance of maintaining Jewish identity and community. Accepting Jesus can be seen as aligning oneself with a group that has historically, there's been a lot of effort to destroy or forcibly convert Jews. It's important to understand that this isn't about holding modern Christians responsible for what their ancestors did. It's more about recognizing how this painful history shapes perceptions and reactions. For many Jews, rejecting Jesus isn't just about theology. It's about honoring the memory of ancestors who suffered for their faith and preserving an identity that has survived against incredible odds. This historical perspective challenges us to approach Jewish-Christian dialogue with sensitivity and humility. It shows us how actions can shape beliefs and how long-lasting they can be. The lasting impact of historical trauma. As we move into the present day, it's important to recognize that Jewish perspectives on Jesus have evolved. While the traditional rejection remains predominant, there's a spectrum of views that reflect the diversity of modern Jewish thought and the changing dynamics of interfaith relations. Let's start with the mainstream view. For most observant Jews, Jesus is seen as a historical figure, a Jewish teacher who lived in the 1st century CE. They might acknowledge his influence on world history, but they don't accept his divinity. Or Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, a well-known modern Jewish thinker, sums up this view. Jews don't accept Jesus as the Messiah because he didn't fulfill the messianic prophecies. However, there's a growing recognition of Jesus as a Jewish figure. Many Jewish scholars now study Jesus in his historical Jewish context. For instance, Amy Jill Levine, a prominent Jewish New Testament scholar, has done extensive work on understanding Jesus within his Jewish milieu. This academic interest doesn't necessarily mean religious acceptance, but it shows a willingness to engage. Some liberal Jewish thinkers have gone even further with Jesus as part of Jewish history. Rabbi Michael Lerner, editor of Tikkun magazine, has suggested that while Jews shouldn't accept Jesus as God or Messiah, they can appreciate him as a Jewish teacher who spread ethical monotheism. He argues that Jesus' teachings on social justice align with Jewish values. Then there's the perspective of secular Jews who might view Jesus purely through a cultural or historical lens without religious implications. For them, Jesus might be seen as an influential historical figure, much like there are other important personalities in world history. It's also worth noting the existence of Messianic Judaism, which combines Jewish identity with belief in Jesus as the Messiah. However, it's important to understand that mainstream Judaism does not recognize this as a form of Judaism. It views it instead as a form of Christianity. In recent years, there's been increased interfaith dialogue between Jews and Christians. This has led to greater mutual understanding. Some Christians have gained a deeper appreciation of Jesus' Jewish roots. Some Jews have also reconsidered long-held assumptions about Christianity. However, it's important to understand that these evolving perspectives don't negate the fundamental theological differences. The vast majority of Jews, regardless of their level of observance, do not accept Jesus as the Messiah or as a divine figure. The reasons we've discussed in previous sections, theological interpretations, cultural identity, and historical experiences, continue to shape this stance. Moreover, many Jews express concern about Christian missionary efforts directed at Jews, seeing them as disrespectful of Jewish identity and beliefs. Organizations like Jews for Judaism actively work to counter these efforts and provide resources for Jews to respond to Christian evangelism. Resources for Jews to respond to Christian evangelism. At the same time, some Jewish circles are focusing more on the difference between accepting Jesus' teachings and accepting him as a divine figure or the Messiah. As Rabbi Irving Greenberg puts it, Jews can respect Jesus as a teacher of ethics without accepting the Christian theological claims about him. It's also worth noting that in Israel, where Judaism is the majority religion, perspectives on Jesus can be quite different from those in diaspora communities. There's often less emotional charge around the topic and more willingness to engage with Jesus as a historical figure. These modern perspectives reflect the complexity of Jewish identity in the 21st century. They show us that while most Jews still reject Jesus as the Messiah, the conversation around Jesus in Jewish thought is becoming more nuanced and evolving. Understanding these modern perspectives is crucial for fostering meaningful interfaith dialogue and mutual understanding between Jews and Christians. It reminds us that views can change over time, even as fundamental beliefs remain constant. As we conclude, as we've looked into this topic, we've seen that the Jewish rejection of Jesus as the Messiah is a complex issue with roots in theology, history, culture, and identity. It makes us think about how we can approach interfaith discussions with respect, empathy, and a willingness to understand diverse perspectives. As we've journeyed through the complex landscape of Jewish perspectives on Jesus, we've encountered there are a few things we need to keep in mind as we move forward. First, we need to recognize that there are differences between Jewish and Christian communities. These differences are rooted in history and cultural identity. Second, it's important to approach this topic with humility and openness. Both Jews and Christians need to recognize that their perspective is not the only valid one. Hillel said, "Don't do to others what you hate them for." That's the essence of the Torah. Everything else is just explanation. So go and learn. Education is key. Christians seeking to understand their Jewish neighbors should take the time to learn about Jewish history, theology, and culture. This doesn't mean abandoning one's own beliefs. It means gaining a deeper appreciation for the Jewish perspective. Similarly, Jews can benefit from understanding Christian theology and the diversity within Christianity. Interfaith dialogue programs have proven effective in building bridges. These forums allow for honest, respectful conversations about differences and commonalities. The Vatican's Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews and various local interfaith councils are examples of initiatives. Fostering such dialogue is key. It's important to move beyond tolerance to genuine respect. This means not just accepting the other's right to their beliefs, but truly valuing the richness of their tradition. As Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, often emphasized, the test of faith is whether I can make space for difference. For Christians, this might mean reconsidering how they, instead of seeing Jewish rejection of Jesus as a problem to be solved, it can be viewed as an opportunity to deepen one's own faith through engagement with a different perspective. Pope Francis has said that dialogue and friendship with the Jewish people are part of the life of Jesus' disciples. For Jews, it might involve distinguishing between historical Christian anti-Semitism and modern Christians who are really interested in understanding and friendship. It could also mean being open to learning about Christianity without worrying about losing your own identity. both communities can focus on shared values and common goals. Judaism and Christianity both emphasize ethical monotheism, social justice, and the dignity of human life. Working together on social issues like fighting poverty, promoting peace, and protecting the environment can build bonds that go beyond theological differences. It's also really important to address anti-Semitism and other forms of religious bigotry head-on. Christian leaders have a responsibility to educate their communities about the harmful legacy of anti-Semitism and to actively combat it. Jewish leaders can also acknowledge positive changes in Christian attitudes towards Jews and Judaism. Courses on comparative religion and joint study programs can promote understanding in academic settings. Initiatives like the Center for Jewish-Christian Understanding and Cooperation in Israel are pioneering such efforts. On a personal level, building genuine friendships across religious lines can be transformative. Sharing meals, celebrating each other's joyous occasions, and offering support in times of difficulty can create bonds that overcome theological divides. Sharing in each other's happy times and offering support when things are tough can create bonds that go beyond theological differences. It's important to remember that understanding doesn't require agreement. Jews and Christians can maintain their distinct beliefs while still respecting and learning from each other. As the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber wrote, the real dialogue is one in which each of the partners, even when they're in opposition, hears, affirms, and confirms their opponent as. And finally, both communities can embrace the concept of holy envy. This is the ability to admire and learn from the strengths of another's faith tradition without abandoning one's own. This approach is advocated by scholars like Krista Stendahl, and it can enrich both faiths. In conclusion, bridging the gap between Jewish and Christian perspectives on Jesus requires patience, empathy, and a willingness to engage with different viewpoints. It's not about erasing differences, it's about creating a space where those differences can coexist peacefully, and even enrich our understanding of faith and human experience. Where we can find ways to live side by side in peace and even gain new insights into our faith and human experience. By building understanding and respect, we honor our own traditions and contribute to a more harmonious world. As the prophet Micah said, "What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." In this spirit of justice, mercy, and humility, we can build bridges of understanding that span even the widest theological divides.